married to someone from India. Marrying into his family has meant lots of new traditions and unpacking the cultural assumptions beneath them. One of those has absolutely been a richer experience for me of interconnection and the expectation of that. That deeper interconnection shows up in a lot of ways. It's embedded in a sense of community that means that people drop in whenever they're in the neighborhood, the way they immediately took me into their lives, the way in which, too, my mother-in-law can tell you, like some supercharged computer, within a minute of being introduced to someone, 1 to 3 ways in which they are related to her. From, my father roomed with your uncle their first year in college, to your third cousin on your mother's side married my father's first cousin. Connections and their pull and their give through time, you come to see, is like an enormous net that catches everyone. My mother-in-law's future father-in-law, for instance, sorry, this is going to challenge all of you to think of family trees, but I can't really make it simpler, so you can read the sermon later if you really want. My mother-in-law's future father-in-law, for instance, came to visit her and her mother just after my mother-in-law was born. You see, the mother and my future mother-in-law, they'd fled to Mumbai during the war because it was seen as too dangerous for a woman in this tender time. And Mama's future father-in-law came as a distant connection, offering good wishes and a hand of support should they need it, having heard they were in town. Only later would it seem fortuitous or at all out of the ordinary. What also feels part of this rich sense of network and connection through time, I have come to see, is India's robust gift culture. By robust gift culture, I mean that almost wherever you go, and for whatever reason, you bring a gift. The gift doesn't have to be super fancy or expensive. In fact, it really shouldn't be in some ways. But you bring something. Women like my mother-in-law, in fact, have drawers of gifts ready and wrapped, just so they're not caught empty-handed. But also go through their days and through the world, remembering what it is that various other people love and treasure, picking them up as they go, which is to say they and many others are constantly engaged in some way in this culture of the giving and receiving of gifts. I suppose this is not radically unlike how we are in the US. We bring and receive gifts often. But the difference is in the how of it. Early on, for instance, I noticed that no one said things like, "Oh, I'll get this lunch, you get the next one." Or, "You brought us such a beautiful bottle of wine last time, I wanted to bring you one of our favorites." Even things like that were seemingly innocuous to me, I was told didn't ring culturally appropriate. I mean, here I think we often say things like that, at least in my family we do, to put the other person at ease about accepting a gift. There I came to see it spoke of a certain underlying sense of quid pro quo to the whole thing, which was against its very nature. There may be a sense that the score evens out, even in India, in the world of gifts. But in my experience, the score wasn't expected to even out in any particular time frame. And the way was too long to track, so there was a trust in the giving, a surrender to it. Perhaps it ties back to my mother-in-law's memory for connections, that computer in her head that keeps generations of records of connections and overlaps. Perhaps there's some sense that if things don't even out in this life, If you do a big favor to someone, if you lift a big load, if you rescue someone from dire circumstances, that the karma of it will still carry on, that maybe your children's lives or your grandchildren's or your great-grandchildren's will go better. And indeed, there are plenty of stories that bear out that truth. His great-grandfather gave my grandfather his first job, and now my son was given his first job by a member of their family. But also, there's just this assumption that the giving has power. I'm not saying, just for the record, that Indian culture, in my limited experience of it, in the limited community in which I am immersed when I'm there, is perfect. Many communities I observed were more expansive and generous within their community than outside its geographic or ethnic or religious boundaries. So there is expansiveness and open-handedness, and maybe also some protective limits to that expansiveness. And I feel like I've seen the power of that expansiveness in action and its potential. And maybe it's larger truth, too. Ownership, after all, is such a funny thing. As the notion shows up, at least in white European American culture, it both makes sense and is completely insane, too. And it's not universal, not even wholly native to this land, as we heard in our reading this morning. For sure, most cultures have notions of ownership, but often rich notions of shared ownership, too. And as a part of that, also, this sense of the power and place of what I'll call a culture of gifting. It's not just the native people that Hutcheson meets that have valuable things that move among them, whose power is, in part, that they keep moving. Hyde details people from around the world in which there's shared ownership, but also this idea that the most valuable things in the world have to keep moving, and that somehow this motion of them helped build connections, helped foster this network of trust among people. You gave what was most precious among you, and you could not demand the gift's return. The most precious possessions of the tribe, trusted and passed hand to hand. It served as this constant reminder of the larger bind and covenants that held you in a much larger network of beliefs and commitments. To be an Indian giver, so to speak, then, is to be wildly trusting and a committed builder of social capital. Whereas to hold the gift, to use it to build your private stores, to accumulate wealth, that is to be like the person who dams the river in the landscape of shared life. In fact, there are many stories across cultures that tell about gift giving, and very often in those stories, the one who hangs on to a gift and does not pass it on loses life. A metaphor for what in fact happens. Not building on, but blocking the strength of the networks between us, after all, means that we, in those moments, break the bonds, right? We isolate ourselves, spiritually for sure, and that is a kind of death. I am the wealthy miser, as the character from the wise fables of Daffy Duck would say. I went Friday to Civic Center to sit, literally, with the folks who were 6 days, I think, at that point, into maybe on the 7th day of their street retreat with the faithful fools, Mary Gans among them, and surprisingly here today. They were weary at that point and eager for showers and stripped down. I would say. Opened up in other ways, in the ways that such moments and experiences of being stripped down do open us up. One woman laughed, but was also touched as she told the story of waking to find placed at her head on her sleeping bag a carefully folded bag, and inside it, half a donut. The other half had been eaten, she said, smiling, but it was left there carefully for me to find it in the morning when I woke. It wasn't much, but we can imagine who left it for her. And for someone without much to give, that tender, thoughtful, generous gift was powerful to leave behind. Funny, I thought, sometimes who knows to keep the gifts moving? Ownership, stopping the flow of life's gifts, that's the crazy idea, really. The fearful way to live, the spiritually confused path. It ignores, doesn't it, all of the transcendent wisdom of the ages, everything about the whole being only as strong as its weakest part, and every deathbed insight, too. Just this week, I had some inner ear issues, and I was put on a medicine that made me short of breath and dizzy and loopy, to be honest. It made me feel weak and vulnerable and at risk of actually being in real trouble. I have since taken myself off the medication, and yesterday and today, increasingly, I feel better. But as I was going through it, I couldn't help but think, oh my God, this is a preview of what I will someday face. All of this weakness and fear and vulnerability. Strangely, my response when I felt better was to feel compelled to do what? To go home and clean out boxes. This strange instinct, I think, to pare down to what matters. Even slight brushes with mortality make clear what we already know. Years ago, I heard a Buddhist saying, when someone gives you a bowl, imagine it broken. Pretty depressing when you have a new bowl you love. But so wise, right? To live in the impermanence, because it's being invited into a wiser way of being, right? Because the deeper truth is that life is placed into our hand like that bowl. We're not supposed to cling to it, not supposed to cling to the body, strong and sure and unbroken, or the protections of wealth or power, fleeting as they are. There's only suffering there, but also it's a life built on false pretenses too. Instead, we have this challenge, spiritually and then practically in the world, to wake each morning pulling back the dawn like tissue on some vast, incredible gift, as the poet writes. And what ingrate or dullard doesn't know the cardinal rule of gifting? I was thinking about it. Even our body prayer has that built into it, right? You wake, there's awe and gratitude, there's this sense of abundance, the day laden with gifts in your arms, the scooping through the few you can gather, more than enough for the day, pressed into you. And then what's the last move? To offer yourself to the world. Not to hold here. Hold your breath and we die, right? Dam, the stream, and the river can't nourish the lands beyond us. When I said in my first sermon here that this was a place where we practiced the kingdom of heaven, I meant this as part of it, right? This would be part of it. Because this is a place where we get to practice this culture of gifting. It is a place built on the assumptions of gift culture. It endures because of that. We didn't say, what we didn't say, I should say, in our vows to the new members today was that they just agreed to live in a tribe bound by the culture of giving, the commandments to live that way. But I'm sure they knew that already. Someone goes with you to the hospital as an advocate. I pull weeds in the garden. You serve as a greeter to visitors. You make part of the communal supper. You tend to the finances. You review the legal contracts. You call us to important witness and justice moments. I'll teach poetry to your children. You run a small group ministry. You sing in the choir because what gift is it if it's sung alone, not spilled out over 200 people? We give, and the place comes alive because of it. We receive, for sure, but it's this cycle that makes this place come alive. Here we experience it and we model it. It's what makes this possible. A chance to see how gorgeous it is to live this way and how different. So the gift experiment. Everywhere, live the truth you know. Practice it. Every morning, pull back tissue like the dawn on some vast, incredible gift. Then offer yourself to the world to be used up. Join the tribe and keep the sacred objects, all of them moving. Love, justice, compassion, courage, wisdom. Pass the bowl along before it breaks. Challenge a world under the deadly illusion of ownership. See another way and model that way. Live like you aren't keeping score, and let abundant life flow through us like a mighty river headed to places we cannot see but surely bless, as those before us blessed us. Our invitation is to be people who trust in the gift. So may it be for us all.